Here is the Kathmandu Base Camp Retreat 360 tent, and now we're going to show you how to pitch it. Here we have all the bits and pieces for the Kathmandu Retreat 360. It's a bit of a beast. It looks like a big tent, it looks complex, but if you go through these stages, it'll actually be quite straightforward to pitch. The first thing you do is you identify what you've got. Got a bag of poles, pegs, and the fly. Now the fly sheet actually has some of the floor sewn to it, so don't be confused when you're pitching the tent with the inner and the fly. So we don't need the fly right now, we'll just carry it out of the way and we'll sort out the inner. Once you've got the inner separated out, lay it out on the ground and just make sure before you pitch it, before you actually put the inner down, that there's no sharp rocks or sticks poking up that are going to damage the floor. So once you've checked the area, just unroll the inner. This part of the inner has the central living area and the two sleeping areas at each end. The sleeping area, living area, and sleeping area at the far end. And this is the front. Now you can tell that this is the front of the inner for the central part of the tent because it's got this Velcro flap here. And that Velcro flap is used to tie on the front vestibule. Once you've put the inner on the ground and you've decided exactly where you want to put it, you peg the corners out. One peg in the four corners, push it in, and if the ground's a bit tough, a rubber mallet is a good thing to use. The next step is to assemble the poles. So there's quite a few poles here, but they're all colour coded. The most important thing to remember when you're handling these pole sets is they're held together with bungee through the middle, and that holds the different sections together. Never drop the poles on a hard surface because you'll cut through the bungee and then the poles will fall apart. So when you undo a pole, when you're ready to assemble it, just open it up and allow the pieces to slot in. There's all the poles assembled, and here's some steel poles that are a little bit different. Now they're for the veranda. We don't need those right now, so we'll just put them aside. Once you've assembled all the poles, they're all colour coded, so lay them out in the position on the inner. The two black poles are the biggest ones, and they go across the tent. Then there's blue and then yellow at either end, and you'll be able to tell that you've got the right pole in the right place because each pole sleeve is colour coded. There's a little piece of coloured binding which matches the pole, so blue pole to blue binding, and at the front here, yellow pole to yellow binding. Threading these poles really is a two-person job, especially for the black ones. They're the longest poles and they take most of the initial weight of the tent. So black pole to black coated sleeve, one person feeding in and the other person pushing from behind. Once the pole's most of the way through, come in the other side and finish feeding it through. And you need to feed the pole through until it's roughly central in the pole sleeve. Once you've threaded the two black poles, the next two poles are the blue ones. Once again, blue pole to blue pole sleeve. It's important when you're putting the pole through that you put it through that opening which goes underneath the black pole. Thread it in and thread it through. The real trick with putting a tent up this big is to get someone inside the tent and lifting up underneath those two central crossed black poles. And that just takes the load out of putting the whole thing up and just lift the whole tent up vertically and it just creates the shape. First of all, clip in the black poles onto the pins and then move around and do the opposite diagonal. Once the first diagonal's up, take the second black pole and clip it in. And come around, take the last end of the black pole and clip it in place. Now once that's there, the person who's inside, he's been faithfully holding up those 2 black poles for so long, they can let their hands down. It's all done. The next step is to put in the 2 blue poles. Now this is much easier if you have one person on each end of the pole to bend them round together. Bend the pole down together and clip it down. Once both blue poles are in, take these plastic clips and clip them on. And you repeat that for the other 3 sides. And you repeat the same process for the yellow poles. One person either side and clip it in place. One important thing to be aware of is when you're clipping these poles in, that you make sure the webbing isn't twisted. So if the webbing's twisted around like this, just make sure it's sitting flat. Once you've assembled the inner, all the poles are in place and everything looks good, the next thing to do is to put the fly on. The first thing you need to do is you lay the fly out and just orient it correctly to the tent. So the back of the tent has just a fly, and the front of the tent also has a vestibule, and that's the way to identify it. You identify the tent fly by rolling it open, and you can identify it because the front of the fly has the floor sewn in into the vestibule. Once you've identified and oriented the front of the fly, grab the back edge of the fly and both of you walk together, pulling it over the inner. A very important thing before you do anything else with the fly is to attach the fly to the inner. You do that using Velcro tabs. Lift up the corner of the fly, and behind each guy point is a Velcro wrap. With the Velcro around the pole, the guy point is secure. Once all of the Velcros have been wrapped around the pole, clip the fly down to the inner at each of the pole points. And go around the tent, clipping all the buckles together, making sure everything's tight. Then we go around the front of the tent and sort that vestibule out. Now that the fly is clipped down, we can start assembling the vestibule. The first pole to go in is the red pole, and it matches to the red pole sleeve on the outside of the fly here. Once it's halfway through, move around to the other side of the vestibule to continue feeding it. Just keep working the pole through and attach the end of it onto the pin. And the other end of the pole gets clipped in, and that's the red pole done. We now move on and do exactly the same thing with the grey pole in the front part of the vestibule. Grey pole, matching grey binding. Once the pole's threaded through, clip it in like you did the others. Grab the corner of the fly and pull it forward. A couple of handy pegs, and then just check and see how it looks. Now that looks pretty square. There's no odd tension problems or wrinkles, and that's the majority of the tent structure complete. There's only one more pole to go, and that's the rear vestibule pole. It's another grey pole, matches the sleeve, and you just thread it through. And once the pole's through, clip it in place. Now that that last grey pole's in place, you peg out the rear vestibule. Once again, keeping it nice and tight. The last thing to do to secure the vestibule to the front of the tent is to put on the Velcro skirt and some clips. So the hook goes through the ring, this clip goes around the pole, and the Velcro patch seals like that. And you repeat that for all the Velcro patches along the width of the vestibule. Patch is on, hooks and clips. Then take these elastic tension fins, hook them up through these plastic rings, and that keeps the door zip nice and stable. Once those front tension fins are in, come around to the back side of the tent, open up the back door, and inside there are two more fins, and they get clipped through the plastic rings to hold the back door in place. Even though all the poles are in place and the fly is pegged out, the Retreat 360 really isn't secure against high winds until you peg out the guy ropes. Peg them out about 1 metre or 1.5 metres away from the wall of the tent, and adjust the tension. If you want to open up the front of the Retreat 360 once it's pitched to get a little bit more of that open air flow, this is where these steel poles come in. They're in 4 sections and they clip together like that. Unzip the front of the door, in each corner of the door here there's a steel eyelet. Take the pole, thread it through the eyelet, take the guy rope, loop it over the top of the pole, and peg the guy out. You peg the guy rope out at about 45 degrees to the tent. Adjust the position of the pole so that it's vertical. Check the tension. And then you have the Retreat 360 ready for a fantastic holiday.